2 weeks ago, we recounted all of the Democratic failures over the past year and explored the question, is it too late for them? Well, within the course of 2 weeks, Democrats seem to have done a complete 180, cutting back on lockdowns, ending vaccine mandates, and trying their best to prop up the feeble chump we call Commander-in-Chief. What are these shady screw-ups up to? You're watching Politics Corner. Stay tuned.
Hello, folks. Welcome to Politics Corner. Hey, Ishaan.
Hi, Pallavi. How are you doing today?
Good.
All right, so I think a lot of conservatives have simply written off the fact that people do not trust the government and or the public health officials who are established right now. And while that is true, anyone can infer that simply from, looking around. I want to dive a little bit deeper. I feel like that's what we're always able to do with Politics Corner. And that's what I love about this podcast, is that we're able to investigate further. And I want to ask the question, why? Why do people not trust the government? Pallavi, what do you think?
I think it's a great time to actually go a little bit deep and examine this, right? Because we've seen pretty heated debates over the last couple of years on how, COVID should be managed, etc., whether it's mask mandates or vaccines, etc. So I think this is a really good time to actually go a little deep and understand what's going on behind these behaviors.
Right, and I think everybody kind of has their own reasoning for why they do not trust the government right now. But I think it all stems from the reality that the government is politically motivated. They care about the populace in general. They don't necessarily care about you, David Smith, living at 14600 Pennsylvania Crest. They don't care about you. They care about the entire country. I think if we were to dive a little bit deeper into the idea that the government is only politically motivated, one example that I really found interesting was the Tuskegee experiments.
Yeah, and By the way, when you say government, you mean not just the politicians, but also the government agencies.
This is the other thing. A lot of people that I talked to about this, they were like, yeah, of course, politicians are politically motivated. What's new? But I wasn't talking about politicians. I'm talking about non-elected officials. People who just work as part of the civil service system. So the Tuskegee experiments, for example, this is a joint study between the Department of Health and Human Services, the very same one that issued the healthcare vaccine mandate, and the CDC. You know them. In a joint study, they gathered 500 impoverished black men in 1930s and told them that they would give them free health care for their, quote, bad blood. Okay? In reality, they were actually studying syphilis in these patients. They never told them that they had syphilis. They did not provide them any treatment. They only observed them. And in some cases, it was pretty invasive and painful. Check this out.
Under the false pretense of providing a special remedy, researchers performed painful and invasive spinal taps to investigate the disease's neurological consequences. A decade after the study began, clinical trials confirmed that penicillin effectively cured the disease in its early stages. The study's leadership decided to withhold knowledge of new treatments from their subjects. During World War II, researchers convinced the local draft board to exempt men from their study, preventing them from enlisting and potentially accessing penicillin. The study even continued through the 1950s, when penicillin was shown to help manage late-stage syphilis.
They denied their patients penicillin.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? They denied their patients penicillin even once it was proven that it could save their lives.
They willingly let people die.
Not only willingly let people die, they weren't just some innocent bystanders. Don't you dare paint them as people who just failed to act. No, they did act. They called private doctors, normal doctors. Can you imagine the government calling your primary care physician and telling them, do not treat this person because we are studying them and we don't want them to get normal treatment. We want to see how they die. In the end, 128 participants died from the disease, 40 spouses were infected, and 19 children were infected at birth. Here's the part that really gets me. Here's the clincher. In 1971, several doctors were as astonished as we are in San Francisco, and they raised alarms with the CDC. Because of this, the CDC conducted an internal review, and they concluded that there were no ethical violations to be concerned about.
Really?
Yes, they determined that the study was perfectly ethical.
Wow.
And then the doctors who thought that there were ethical violations leaked the study to the press. And only then, only because of the political damage to the politicians who were funding them, was the study finally shut down in 1972. This is the proof. The government agency only cared about optics. Until that point, they were perfectly willing to let this slide under the radar and be swept under the rug as an active, unethical experiment.
So some may say, well, this was years ago, and this is a historical example. But what about modern day? So let's talk about modern day. Let's talk about COVID. Do you remember, Ishaan, when COVID started, what were we told about not needing masks at all?
You're completely right. The guidance from our public health officials over COVID has been completely inconsistent. Okay? On February 29th in 2020, the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, he tweeted, "Stop buying masks. They are not effective in preventing the general public from catching #coronavirus. But if healthcare providers can't get them to care for sick patients, it puts them and our communities at risk." Okay, so it turns out that they did know that masks were important, but they needed them in hospitals more. So they lied to us under the pretense of achieving the greater good.
Right.
And we know this. We know that they're okay with doing this to achieve the greater good. So if you're an individual like you or me, why would we trust what they say at face value now? Why wouldn't we be skeptical about them potentially lying to us again for again achieving the greater good?
Yeah, very true.
And then on July 14th, so this is about a couple months later, the CDC announced that the data was now abundantly clear and people need to wear masks. They stated, this is what gets me, this is ridiculous. They stated that if every American wore a mask, we could be done with the pandemic in, quote, 2 months.
Wow.
They knew that masks were effective from the beginning. They were trying now to entice people who didn't trust them with a nonsense timeline. Cut a little bit forward, because some people say that there are 2 eras to COVID. I've heard a couple people talk about it this way. There's 2 eras. There's the Trump era of COVID, and then there's the Biden era of COVID. All right, let's talk about the Biden era. Let's start with the Biden campaign. Perfect way to start off the Biden era. Here's something that I believe Barack Obama would call off message from Kamala Harris.
The Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election. Should Americans take it, and would you take it?
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Wow. But then the moment she's in office, everyone get vaccinated, get boosted, because the hurricanes are coming.
The politicians will always stick to what is best for their party and for their own campaigns. It's not about you, it's about them.
In January, the very first month that Biden was in office, he issued 12 executive orders mandating masks and social distancing in various different circumstances. Now, here's the thing. This isn't necessarily a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an issue with all politicians. It's a fact. They care about politics. Big surprise. But Republicans acknowledge this. They acknowledge that they can't be the ones to make your health decisions, and they think that you are the best one to make your health decisions and the health decisions of your children and dependents, etc. Democrats continue to push this narrative that somehow they know better than you. They know better than you about how to parent your kids. They know better than you about how to educate your kids. They know better than you about who to get vaccinated, when to get vaccinated, and how many shots they should throw at you with, like, tranquilizers.
So Biden did run on, being his campaign message was all around, I will handle COVID like Trump never could.
I will fix COVID.
I will fix COVID like Trump never could.
And that was exactly what Kamala Harris just demonstrated here. She openly, with impunity, saying, I will not support a vaccine should it come out during the Trump administration. But the very same vaccine, the day afterwards, when she is now the vice president elect, at that point, the vaccine is now different.
Now it's the magic
Because
pill.
it's my vaccine, not Trump's.
Yeah, now it's the magic pill. Even if it's
Exactly.
not 100% effective, it's the magic pill.
100%. But here's the thing. Why did they have to mandate masking and social distancing when, if we had public trust in these institutions, we would have just done it? Because, big shocker to all the left-wing politicians listening, please listen up, turn up your radio sets. People want to live. People have a personal interest. If we trusted you, we would do what you said because we believe that your advice is the best advice. But instead, you repeatedly lied to us, you were inconsistent in your message, and people recognized it. And this was the consequence of your lie. You're the Faucis who cried wolf. What can we say?
And so the next logical step for him was mandating vaccines. Of course, we know how that turned out for him.
Supreme Court smackdown.
It's an unalienable fact that vaccines do not work on the Omicron variant.
Yeah, I believe a study out of Israel, actually, I have this in my notes, a study out of Israel found that even after 4 doses of an mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, patients were not immune to the Omicron variant, nor were they significantly healthier when infected. This was some nonsense that the CDC tried to push. Yes, but it reduces hospital. No effect on the Omicron variant.
In fact, this was from an article published in support of the vaccines, and the proof they had was 50% of hospitalizations from on COVID were people who were not vaccinated. So if 50% were unvaccinated, what does that make the other 50%? This is all with Omicron. So as you said, there is no difference whether someone's vaccinated or not.
Here's the thing. For about a year now, the scientific evidence has been clear that anything besides an N95 or KN95 mask used, 1, universally, and 2, worn properly. Let's be honest. When you wear a mask, you're going out in public, you see people pulling it below their noses, taking them off to drink water, eat food. It's ineffective. And if it's anything besides an N95 or KN95, it's even more ineffective. So here's the thing. We have known this. But the celebrities who are supporting the politicians, or sometimes even directly supporting mask mandates for children, by the way, we know that children who wear masks in schools struggle with basic phonics, reading, and social engagement. This is unequivocal facts. We know this, and yet the same people pushing these mask mandates showed up to the Super Bowl unmasked. This is hilarious. This is the typical Hollywood elitism, okay? And it gave rise to the Twitter hashtag rules for thee and not for me. I have to be honest, I love this hashtag. We love this hashtag. If we could, we would write it and frame it.
It exposes the hypocrisy so well.
Can we write hashtag rules for thee and not for me on a banner, stick it to an airplane, and have it flown right over Ellen DeGeneres' house? But here's the thing. I love hashtag rules for thee and not for me because it's not just celebrities. It's also politicians themselves. And when it's a politician themselves, there's just some satisfaction that we get in really being able to put a fine point on how shameful these hypocrites are. Stacey Abrams. Oh yeah, we're talking about it. Stacey Abrams, governor of Georgia, incumbent. She's running for re-election this year. She was reading to children for Black History Month, and she took off her mask and went to go sit with the children and take a picture. And the children, they're all forcefully masked up. And she talks about this like it's a brag. She talks about how the only way she agreed to take her mask off was if everyone else had to keep it on. The nonsense that spews from her mouth is truly amazing if you can understand it, if you can discern fact from fiction, which is 98% fiction. But here's the thing. This was her response to this. She wrote in a statement, "It is shameful that our opponents are using a Black History Month reading event for Georgia children as the impetus for a false political attack." Right, because COVID sees race. COVID observes Black History Month, actually, and it saw that you were reading to children, not just reading to children, but for Black History Month. And therefore, COVID dare not enter that classroom. What? She dodged the criticism and then basically accused any Republican who called her out on this for being racist for criticizing her. Gavin Newsom, he's no better, okay? Governor of California. He was caught right after advocating for his mask mandates, standing next to Magic Johnson in a stadium taking a photograph with him. Magic Johnson has to be one of the most famous celebrities to ever be openly HIV positive. He is immunocompromised. He's over the age of 60. Yeah. No masks right next to him.
Tick, at-risk individual.
Yeah. Now, I need a moment here, so just hear me out. Don't anybody on the left tell me that the advice is inconsistent because the data is inconsistent. They're just doing the best they can, the poor politicians. They don't know what to do. No one knows what to do. Everything is so new and unusual and uncomfortable, and we're all just adjusting to Zoom, and at this point, no one even knows how to unmute their microphone. What nonsense. We have known enough about the pandemic to make wise decisions politically. But here's the thing. When data comes out is not when politicians respond. Politicians respond when they want to, when it's convenient. And this is the pattern that we have identified throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, that's when we learn about the new data.
We learn about the new data ahead of an election. We learn about a new data ahead of an uprising. We learn about a new data ahead of a pivot in political message. We never hear about the new data when it comes out. I mean, if you really want to comb through the sites, you can find it on harvard.edu, hopkins.edu. Yeah, you can find their studies. You can find the Hopkins meta-analysis that completely trashed any semblance of potential usefulness to lockdowns. You can find this meta-analysis, but of course, we only heard about it when Jen Psaki wanted to use it as a pivoting point for the Biden campaign. Here is Jen Psaki misrepresenting her butt off in front of the press.
The president has been clear. We're not pushing lockdowns. We've not been pro-lockdown. That has not been his agenda. Most of the lockdowns actually happened under the previous president.
The lockdowns happened under the previous president at the behest of governors from your party.
From Democratic states. I know.
The amount that, do you remember fidget spinners? I remember back when I was in middle school, they were popular. Fidget spinners, they were green or colorful, and you would literally hold them between your thumb and your forefinger, and you would just spin the crap out of them, and they would spin 100 times a second. That is how hard Jen Psaki is spinning this story.
She said it with a straight face too, right? She actually attributed lockdowns to the Republican Party president. Wow.
It is hilarious to me how Democrats can just lie with impunity. Alrighty, folks. For this next part, I need you to do me a favor and think like Joe Biden. Now, you might find this particularly difficult since Joe Biden doesn't think on most occasions, but just try your best. Joe Biden watches the news. Joe Biden looks across to international borders, not particularly the southern border. He likes to ignore that one, but other borders. Joe Biden sees what's happening in Canada. Speaking of which, let's talk about Canada. Pallavi?
Yeah, you are probably living in another world if you haven't heard of the Freedom Convoy. But I'll give you a quick background, right? It started when there were these vaccine mandates that were going to go into effect for truckers, that if they wanted to, drive their trucks and transport goods between US and Canada. So the mandate was going to go into effect that they needed to be vaccinated. And that's what the protest started as. It started as a trucker convoy that headed towards Ottawa, and they wanted to speak with Justin Trudeau. But instead of actually, coming to the table and negotiating and even listening to the concerns and the reasons for these truckers, Prime Minister Trudeau chose to ignore it.
So first he said that they were a small fringe minority
Right.
heading to Ottawa. They responded by showing up in droves and blockading the capital city. Now, they have had 100% peaceful protests, even though that is not what you would hear from the mainstream media.
And it's not just the truckers, right? The truckers were joined by many people of Canada, even on foot, just to show their support. So what started as this protest against the vaccine mandate actually ballooned into a protest about the authoritarian
A referendum.
right, the rules that are being pushed by Trudeau and company.
So here's my problem. The media has absolutely no spine. Okay? They are willing to cover the Black Lives Matter protests as 93% peaceful. Yeah, that would be an A- on your math final. 93%. Yeah, that's 7% not peaceful.
And it's not about not peaceful. Not peaceful to what extent? Like burning buildings and looting on, mass.
$200 billion worth of insured property damage.
Right, exactly. I mean, but I agree with you. The mainstream media has portrayed the Black Lives Matter as a very just and,
Righteous.
dignified cause, whereas the trucker convoy are these extreme right-wingers that, just don't want to get vaccines and they want to bring down the country.
They're being classified as a militant threat to democracy by the
That's
Canadian
a
government.
gross misrepresentation.
Seriously. And they're being met with riot police and SWAT teams. They are confiscating these truckers' fuel
And food.
in the hopes to freeze them out.
Yeah. And to your point, you're absolutely right. These protests have been absolutely peaceful. I've actually seen on the ground videos that were shot not by mainstream media, but by individual people who then posted them on social media. And it looks like people are actually, unified in protesting a cause, but they're absolutely peaceful. They're, laughing, they're talking with each other. And basically doing everything that is consistent with a peaceful protest. We did hear one or two examples. I mean, at least Trudeau called it out, saying they're waving Confederate flags and Nazi flags.
It was a single Nazi flag by
Yeah.
a guy who was then told by the protest leadership to either take it down or get lost.
Right.
GoFundMe. So GoFundMe tried to siphon money from the convoy, and only when threatened with a Federal Trade Commission investigation did they finally back down and agree to refund the donations that they were unwilling to hand off to the convoy. Check this out. This is what Senator Cruz did.
And so today, I sent a letter to the Federal Trade Commission asking that the FTC open an investigation into GoFundMe into whether they've committed deceptive trade practices, because when people gave money, they gave money under the promise it would go to the Freedom Convoy, not to whatever left-wing political ideology GoFundMe and other Silicon Valley companies support.
So Give, Send, Go was their backup plan. This is another crowdfunding site. Famously, this is the site that Kyle Rittenhouse's defense fund used. The Ontario government voted to freeze the Freedom Convoy funds before Give, Send, Go responded with a statement saying, quote, "Canada has absolutely zero jurisdiction over how we manage our funds here at Give, Send, Go." Basically, they just told the Canadian government to get bent.
Right. I mean, and by the way, did you see the misrepresentation where Trudeau was heard saying, "Oh, there is, money being funded by foreign entities."
He meant Arkansas, like the United States of America.
And not,
Foreign
I mean,
entities.
right. And when,
$20, $30 install. It was crowdfunding.
exactly, it was crowdfunding. It's like just regular people who believe in the cause. But the way he kind of represented it sounded like, I don't know, maybe Russian or Chinese interference into Canada.
This has spawned similar protests in Europe and Australia. If that was not like a heartbeat drop for you, it should be. Because Australia had an incredibly authoritarian left-wing COVID-19 response, and it was widely supported. People supported having to send selfies to the government to prove that they were at home when they said they were. Okay? And if that place could have a protest uprising against COVID-19 measures, imagine what could happen in Canada. Worse, imagine what could happen in the United States. So Trudeau knows this. Okay? So earlier this week, Prime Minister Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in Canadian history under the public order category. Now, basically, if to give you the rundown. Prime Minister Trudeau is no longer Prime Minister Trudeau. Rather, he has retitled himself as Lord Almighty Monarch Justin Castro. He also finally took his father's name. So he's invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time under the public order category, which basically means, hey, look, I'm really struggling and I'm pretty bad at my job and I can't maintain order in my government because people really hate me. So let's see if we can authorize military force. But this is going to allow Trudeau to compel banks to freeze bank accounts that could be connected to the Freedom Convoy without a court order. So you open your Venmo app and it's been shut down because you perhaps Venmo'd the Freedom Convoy protesters, okay? And it's been shut down because not only can the banks do it, they have to if they want to avoid civil suits. Now, I wonder, have you seen the memes online and the tweets going around of how many trucks can Trudeau tow if the tow trucks don't want to tow trucks? Pallavi, you tell the story better than I ever
This
could.
is so hilarious. Again, such a departure from the mainstream representation of, the whole Freedom Convoy protest. Because, quite as you said, Trudeau tried to send tow trucks to tow the trucks that were blocking the streets of Ottawa. And the tow trucks, said, yeah, no thanks, we're not doing this. And the ones that showed up actually joined the rally.
It was rather hilarious. And so the tow truck companies refused to assist the Prime Minister on political grounds, but the Emergencies Act will enable Justin Castro to compel private businesses to assist in disbanding the protests. Check out what Trudeau had to say about this.
Measures that we've put in place, there will be an ability to compel, for just compensation, tow truck owners and operators to actually do the jobs for which they have contracts with various orders of government to keep highways and roads clear.
Is it just me, or was his the sign language lady giving him the finger too?
I love how he thinks that if he whispers about authoritarianism, it'll no longer be considered authoritarianism.
This is what they say, There's the saying that, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fear you, then they fight you, and then you win. And that's what's happened here.
I think the key part here is they're going to fight you, but in the end you win. So truckers, stay strong.
Stay strong.
Stay strong. Now I will say, just because we are Politics Corner, and I do want to touch base on the politics here, Parliament, which is basically the Canadian equivalent of Congress, has to approve his invocation of the Emergencies Act within 7 days. Now, the Liberal Party, there's 5 major parties in Canada. The Liberal Party is the most prevalent one. It's not a majority, it is a minority, but it is the biggest minority. And that is Trudeau's party. They don't have enough votes to actually carry through the Emergencies Act. The New Democratic Party, which is generally considered a fringe party, has given them the remaining votes necessary to achieve that majority approval, which is awful. But also, if we were to take this out of the context of another country and realize that our countries are actually not that different, imagine how Joe Biden feels right now. Imagine what he thinks. If this can spur demonstrations in Canada, in Australia, places with heavy left-wing governments, imagine what the unruly Americans are going to do to him. Mm-hmm. Okay?
I mean, and here's the thing, right? Joe Biden, he may not talk about it, but he's 100% cognizant of the fact that he did not win this election with a majority, with a landslide majority. He won it with a bare 51-point-something% majority. So there's a large portion of the country that A, didn't want him as the president, and B, he's even more unpopular now because of all his, economic policies and, mishandling of issues, etc.
I will say it's not just Biden. The entire Democratic Party, aside from Jen Psaki, who's just offering lip service, beyond her, the entire Democratic Party is preparing to do a 180-degree political pivot and pretend that they have not been the party being backed into a corner with masking and vaccines and mandates.
Oh, no. Now the science has changed.
Yeah. So here is Hakeem Jeffries, okay, Democrat congressperson from New York, at a Democrat press briefing. I don't know why he's talking. He is completely insignificant to the scope of the Democratic Party, aside from being a political celebrity. But here is him pretending that Joe Biden somehow ended COVID-19. Check this out.
Variant is in retreat. And that's not by accident. That's because under President Biden's leadership, a public health infrastructure was put into place, beginning with the American Rescue Plan without a single Republican vote, to ensure that we can do everything possible to crush the virus. And that is what has been happening.
So what happened exactly?
The science has changed.
The science has changed. This is the logical fact. You know what? Democrats are basically, they have followed the high school logic to how not to get bullied. When in doubt, play dumb. The amount of blame deference that the Democrat Party utilizes as a regular political tool is
perfect, right?
astonishing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where is this wave of lawlessness? I just can't get over that. Sorry.
I can't get over
Or
the
who's
Nancy.
the governor around here?
But see, Hakeem Jeffries right now, what is he pretending? Like the American Rescue Plan actually did something? Politicians waved their hands in the air to talk about how bad COVID was. COVID is in retreat because this is the natural course of endemic phases of pandemics. It has nothing to do with anything they've done. In fact, one could argue that Biden's failure to get testing kits out to American people is actually hurting our ability to get through the last phase of the pandemic. But no. They don't care about accurate reporting. They care about technical reporting that they can use.
Yeah. Can they say something now and pretend this is their story and they're sticking with it?
The entire Democratic Party is really just trying to save face for the middle of March when we have the State of the Union address. And at that point, they want to have something to pretend like Biden's first year in office was anything short of an absolute, resolute disaster.
But I think that's how he's going to spin it now. Now I have every expectation that COVID's going to be wonderful, the economy is excellent, inflation doesn't exist, I don't know. I mean, now I can expect anything because now I've heard, them pretty much just saying the opposite of exactly what they did less than a year ago.
So, folks, here's the reality. You cannot trust the government to look out for you. Or really look out for anyone but themselves. But that's a tangent.
Be responsible for yourself. Be educated. Be informed.
Exactly. Keep protesting. Keep writing to Congress. And do not let the authoritarian left, here or in Canada, silence you. And by the way, Joe Biden, we have a message for you. Step up or step down. Because this middle ground where you do nothing but pretend that you are the supreme leader of the free world is unacceptable. Thanks for watching, folks.
Hey folks, this is Pallavi. Thank you for watching this episode of Politics Corner. Do me a favor, please follow us on YouTube or your favorite podcast provider. And while you're at it, why don't you also follow us at Politics Corner Official on Instagram. We'll see you next time. Thank you.